Hey everyone, this is Carbonite, and today I'm bringing you a deck profile for my build of Wilista. In case you missed my post, I did actually use this build to successfully win a standard shop challenge. Shouts out to Project CCG for hosting just like an amazing day of official tournaments. They had their Shadowverse regional qualifiers and V Shop Challenge the same day as their standard shop challenge, and the staff did a really good job. There were a ton of people there, and if you saw my post, there were like 67 people alone just for standard, but they did a great job running it, and somehow I managed to take the W through 7 rounds of Swiss and 3 rounds of Top Cut. So now I know I usually don't do like meta deck profiles. I know I'm somewhat competitive when it comes to my fight analysis, but today we're just going to be going through this deck, which if you've seen any deck profiles for Wilista, it's probably going to be the same. This is very bare bones, basic and dry. The deck is just really good, and if you are a decent player, you will be able to pilot it to success. Personally, Wilista is the only like meta deck that I've actually found enjoyable. I don't really like playing most meta decks, but this is one that I actually have a lot of fun with, so let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, so getting started as always with the ride deck. We do have just the basic Wilista ride deck. The starter is just generic D starter. You can play anything you want. It is not name locked. The grade 1 has the skill when it's rode upon by the, actually anything, but just by the grade 2. You can shove a card from your hand into the soul and search your deck for up to 1 gem card. You reveal it, you put it in your hand, and then you shuffle your deck. So there is 1 gem card in the deck, and that's the one that you're always just going to be searching out and just using every single time, because that's what the Wilista deck does. The grade 2 is actually whenever you play a gem card, you do get a draw card. The gem card itself actually lets you draw 1 card as well, so essentially on grade 2 you're drawing an extra 2 cards. And then of course the grade 3 Wilista has the dress up mechanic, where it's always treated as Prismatic Magicka Wilista, the original Wilista, so all the old support will work with her. So when she's placed on Vanguard, you can actually discard card. You choose a gem card from your soul or drop and add it to the hand. So most of the time with this skill, you are going to want to add from the drop. What you really want to be doing is getting to a point when you have 2 gem cards in circulation. Hopefully you have 1 in hand. You use 1 on your grade 2 turn, and then you have another in hand to use the next turn, because what you really want to be doing is using the second skill, which is you act once per turn, soul blast a gem card, and you perform all of the following according to the name of the gem card you soul blast for the cost. So if you soul blast the Everlasting Sapphire, look at top 5 cards of the deck, choose up to 2 units card from among them, call them to rear guard, and then shuffle the deck. And then if you soul blast True Heart Ruby, it gets an extra 15k to the end turn. So since your 1 gem in the deck does actually count as both, you are always going to be getting both of those skills. So realistically, what you want to be doing is riding into the grade 2, putting the gem into the soul, drawing 2 cards, 1 off this and 1 off the gem, and then riding into grade 3. You want to hopefully not have to get the gem back from the soul, so that you can soul blast it out, check top 5, call 2 things, get 15k, and then hopefully you have another gem in your hand to play, so that you can draw another card, and maybe even more than that. And you just kind of want to get into the cycle where you are playing you are soul blasting first and then playing a gem every single turn. I honestly find that for whatever reason, I always draw into like the second or third gem, so I don't use the first or the first skill of Wilista very often. But when you do need to use it, you do kind of need to use it. Sometimes if you are, like if you've lost a couple of gems already, you sometimes do want to use it just in case, because if you don't Persona Ride, you can't actually get that gem back, and the gem is actually pretty important, as we'll be talking about once we get to it. So moving on, we of course do play the other 3 copies of Wilista in the deck. We do want a Persona Ride. Persona Ride is super good in this deck. You already hit for very big numbers, and adding an extra 10k on top of it is just insane, because this is a 5 attack deck. And honestly, you do actually need to Persona Ride in order to get your gem back, because it is an on place. So consistently Persona Riding is very important in the deck. Right, next up for our other grade 3 that we're playing the 4 copies of Ophelia. So Ophelia is a pretty decent card. She came out in LBTO2. So she has the one skill that at the end of the battle that your Wilista attacked, do remember that the new Wilista is still always treated as the old Wilista. You perform all the following depending on the cards that you Soul Blast for your Vanguard's ability this turn, or that you play this turn. So actually, you don't have to Soul Blast in order to have her online. If you play the gems, she is actually available. You can still use her skill. Basically, you get both of these skills because your one gem is treated as both of these, so whether you play one or you Soul Blast one, you're always going to be able to do this. So the first one is that it gets plus 15k, and then the second one is that if you counterblast one and put a backward rear guard on the bottom of your deck, you can stand this unit and then you shuffle your deck. So basically this is your guaranteed 4th attack. You do have to commit something behind the Vanguard. It doesn't necessarily have to be a booster, it just has to be a body, so that Ophelia can put it back and restand herself. But regardless, if you play or Soul Blast the gem, Ophelia will always be getting the extra 15k. But do note that it is after the Vanguard attacks, so you do have to swing the Vanguard. So for this card, I like it okay. I honestly find myself like kind of pitching it and getting rid of it in the early game because it really doesn't do too much. Sure, you can get 4 attacks on your first grade 3 turn, but I would only go for that if I am going first because you don't have any way of countercharging in the deck. So once you go through your 5 counterblast, you're kind of done outside of heals. So you do want to use them sparingly, and ideally you would want to have 3 open CB, and if you use this on your first grade 3 turn, it makes it that much harder to get to that point. So sometimes I don't really use her as often as I could, but she's also really good in the late game when your deck gets pretty thin, and she can put cards back in, which is nice, but I don't really commit too much to the Ophelia. But getting the extra 15k is just like really what's important. Sometimes if I don't want to commit the extra restand, I'll just swing the Vanguard, swing my other rear, and then just swing with this big Ophelia. But theoretically, she can put triggers back. That's something I personally don't do. I have 2 targets that we'll go over a little bit later that are usually the things that end up going back to the deck, but you could theoretically shuffle back triggers, but I don't like doing it because you kind of get rid of shield in your hand, and even though you're drawing a ton of cards, you do kind of want to make every single card count. Alright, so next up we do have 4 copies getting into the grade 2s of the Ramona. So Ramona is a pretty simple card. She is just your basic grade 2, but if you have played both the True Heart Ruby and Everlasting Sapphire this turn, she gets an extra 10k. So this card is really amazing in the early game because she's a 20k attacker. So if you're going first or going second, she is always going to be hitting over defenses, which is something I definitely appreciate as someone who plays Stoicheia and tends to lose to defensives. I do really enjoy having that ability to be able to swing even if my opponent gets a defensive. But she's pretty good in the early game. She's also an ideal restand target because when you Persona Ride and you play the gem, you actually do have the option of restanding both your columns. So Ophelia stands with her skill, and ideally you would want to have this card as your other attacker. I always go back and forth about which one of these 2 is actually better, because this one starts off the swing at either 20 or 30, and Ophelia will start off at either 13 or 23, which are both just, it's like 30 is a little bit better than 23, but on the restand, this attacks once again for 28, which is always going to be better than 20, which would, or on Persona has 38 versus 30. So sometimes I usually try and go 1-in-1, but sometimes double Ophelia is fine. I don't put a huge priority on this card because especially during the late game, it becomes much worse because you get closer to deck out and you aren't able to actually play the gem card because you kind of have like this fear that you will in fact deck out. So she ends up being just 10k body vanilla, which I do kind of like Ophelia because Ophelia is much easier to proc her plus 15 than this card's extra plus 10, but still a very good and very good essential, your main attacker of the deck. Alright, and so just the last of the grade 2s, we do have 4 copies of the Lyrical Cycle card. So in case you don't know, it has the Cycle card ability where you if you discard it during the ride phase, you can blast 1, bot deck it, and draw a card. So actually, this isn't just for ride deck, it's anytime during the ride phase, and Wilista's on-place ability does activate on the ride phase, meaning that if you discard this for the cost of Wilista to get the gem back, you can actually use this skill, which is very, very good, and the main reason we're playing this card at 4 copies. And the second reason is because that second skill is actually very, very relevant. So when it's placed on rear guard, if you persona this turn, you counterblast 1, choose one of your vanguards, it gets a skill that all your front row units get plus 5k. So now you could theoretically stack that, but most of the time you won't. But I really do love using this skill when I have 3 open CB, because you need 1 CB for her, 1 CB for Ophelia, and then 1 CB for the restand that we're going to be taking a look at next. So what that essentially does is if you can double Ophelia and summon, use this card, that means your Ophelias are swinging for 28 on their first swing, which calls for a 20 card guard, which most of the time is either going to be 2 cards or a front trigger. And of course, most people are only playing 3 front triggers in their deck, so it's going to be doing a lot of damage there to their hand. So I really like using that combo. It doesn't always come up because you need 2 CB for every single turn that you want to mount an offense. And once again, we don't actually have any counter charge in the deck, so you do need to be really sparing. You need to make sure that when you're using this second skill, that you're either able to kill them that turn, or you're able to severely cripple them to the point where they can't actually make a comeback. So very good card. I really do love this card. One of my favorites from the deck. Alright, and so next up, I don't usually start off with order cards, but I do kind of want to start off with the gem order because I think it is super important. So now we've alluded to this before, but this is the Crossing Illumerays. This card is also treated as both gems, so for when you Soul Blast this, you get both effects for basically all your cards. So you play it only if you have a Wilista Vanguard. You put this card into the Soul, you draw a card, and you choose one of your Vanguards until the end turn. It gets plus 5k. Then if your opponent is at grade 3 or greater, your Vanguard actually gets a skill that when it attacks you can counterblast 1 and Soul Blast a grade 3 Wilista to stand one of your rear guards, and then you actually can't play any more orders for the rest of the turn. That might seem a little bit weird, but there are actually some Wilista cards that allow you to play more than one order in a turn. So I guess they just don't want you doing that. But theoretically, you could proc this on turn 3 if you're going second. If your opponent rides into grade 3 and then you put a grade 3 Wilista into Soul as cost to search this card with the skill of your grade 1, you can actually do the 5 attacks on your first grade 3 turn. Most of the time it's not worth it, but you know, the option is there if you really want to go to it for it. But the goal of this deck is to you search one out from the ride deck, and you want to be able to see the other copies as you go through the game. This is one of the cards that I try and mulligan to make sure I have at least 1 copy in hand. Even though I am going to search one out, the second copy is just super important, and it is what makes this deck as viable as it is. And it does give you a lot of staying power and it gives you a lot of strength, although it can hurt a little bit in the early game since this card is a no shield value card. Alright, next up, continuing into the grade 1s, we do have 4 copies of Elevira. So Elevira is very simple. When you play Everlasting Sapphire, if you are on grade 3 Wilista, do keep that in mind, you do get to draw a card. So this card isn't actually live until grade 3, which is why sometimes I kind of just pitch it because it is a little bit slow. You can use it for early aggro rush, but sometimes you really don't, because this card is a magnet for attacks, because it's a really good card because essentially the order itself draws 1 card, so every extra copy of Elvira you have on board nets you another extra card. So your opponent does really want to prioritize getting rid of this because it allows you to plus pretty hard. Although I will say a lot of the plus power of Wilista comes from the fact that you're not calling any cards from hand. You're not really committing too much from hand, because you do get to do that top 5 check and call too. So the more as turns go on, the more you can easily craft your board with cards from the top 5 and cards from your hand. So yeah. Alright, so finishing off the grade 1s, pretty much, is just going to be 3 copies of Yuika. So Yuika is a pretty expensive card, and she's got 2 skills, so when your other unit in the same column as this is placed, if your opponent's vanguard is Great to Regret, it gets an extra 5k. So do note that if you call a Yuika and something else off the top of the deck, they are placed at the same time, and Yuika will actually be able to see that, and she gets an extra 5k, assuming the opponent is on grade 3. But the other skill, the one that's more important, is that at the end of the boost a rear guard, you counterblast 1 and then choose one of your boosted rear guards and add it to the hand. So this card it's mainly at 3 copies because that's what we had when we built the deck initially, but in all honesty, Yuika is very good in the deck but not super necessary. There's just so much, there's not too much space when you're maxing out on everything. But Yuika is very good in a lot of situations because you are calling from the top deck, so you can theoretically call a Persona Ride in front of Yuika and bounce to the hand. You can call PGs, bounce to the hand with Yuika. There's just a lot of versatility you get out of playing Yuika in this deck specifically, but at the same time, she's not really super important. Because she doesn't contribute to the strategy at all. She gives you only a little extra 5k power, which matters a little bit sometimes. But for the most part, I don't really prioritize getting Yuika. She's good to have, but definitely not like priority number 1. Alright, so just finishing off the normal units, we do of course have the 3 PGs, and I am actually opting to play the 4th PG over Elementaria because the Elementaria is an order, meaning you can't actually call it off of the Wilista, and it's one less card that you can bounce back to your hand, and I find it doesn't really come up that much. Chronojet is not really that much into the meta. I say that after having faced Chronojet twice during this tournament, but it was okay because it was just one of my friends, my teammate actually. There is actually a reason that I'm playing a 3-1 split. It's because this would be Elementaria if I put it in the deck. So I want to know in every situation, would Elementaria have been better in that situation? And most of the time, the answer is no, because there's not really any guard restrict right now, and there really is not any triple drive stuff, because Messiah is not really that great of a deck, and Chronojet just got hit on the ban list, so a lot of people are not playing it. Alright, so just rounding out the deck, we do have the trigger lineup, which of course is going to be the 8 crit. This is actually my favorite critical trigger from Lyrical. Miss Fluffy Lady. Really do like playing the 8 crit. So the reason we're not playing any Soul Link crits is because I don't really think it's necessary. The extra 1k does matter a little bit because sometimes you do boost the Vanguard and you just hit for better numbers. 9 times out of 10 they are going to be PGing the Vanguard, but being able to make a nice magic number is very important, and in all honesty you don't really need the extra soul. If you're playing the game right, if you're managing your soul correctly, you're not using Yuika way too much, then it is super easy to just manage your soul and have enough to get yourself to the end of the game. Alright, so just rounding out the rest, we are playing the 3 front triggers, because you draw enough in this deck, and if you were to actually play draws, you probably would run into even more deck out problems than the deck already has. And of course, just blanketing giving your front row a blanket another 10k just makes your numbers that are already massive even that much bigger. And since you are a multi-attack deck and you're standing both of your rear guards, front triggers are always live. Alright, so just finishing things out, just playing 4 vanilla heals. Pretty good. I like the extra 15k because I feel like it is very important to have a good early game and to guard early. So if you play the other heals, you're not going to have a good time because, you know, those 10k heals in the early game aren't going to be making magic numbers where you can make a 2 to pass or OT to pass on those first couple turns. And of course, for our OT, we are actually playing blue OT, which is the preferred for Wilista. Lyrical OT only gives you an extra 10k to all your board, which is great, but your numbers already get pretty high. Like we're talking 51 and like 43 most of the time, so you don't really need the extra 20k that it'd be giving to your columns. And blue OT is just that much better. Of course, red OT is an option, but I don't really think it's worth it. In most cases, I would prefer this because you're already hitting for a truck. So this card actually, when you check it, the additional effect is that you give one of your units an extra critical. You choose a card from your drop and add it to your hand. And so basically it's just another critical trigger in the deck. You can add back orders with this. You can add back any of your pieces. It's super good. You can add PGs, but I think this card is just way too good for the deck to be playing anything else. And personally, this deck has also made me realize that I think blue OT is the superior OT. I know red OT is super expensive and it's super hype because multi-attack, whoa, but I think that blue OT is actually much better. Alright, so we're going to end things off with just a quick little test hand. I'll tell you kind of what I prioritize with when it comes to mulliganing, kind of how I liked the tempo to go. So checking the opening hand, we do have a lot of good cards. We have Ramona, which is very good for the early game. We have the extra copy of the gem, which is something I am always looking for. And we did draw into 2 front triggers and a heal trigger. So I would rather have the heals in deck because that's our only way to countercharge, but I do want to keep an extra 15k shield in hand. And even though I'm probably going to draw one off of these other 2, I'm just going to keep one to make sure, even though it does reduce my chances of hitting trigger. So let's draw. Ooh, we draw into the cycle card, another card that is always a prioritized keep. And of course a critical trigger, my favorite, Fluffy Lady. So we're looking to have a very good early game. We've got 2 triggers to make sure that we don't take any damage until we really want to, assuming there's no OT. But things are looking very, very good with this opening hand. So we're just going to shuffle up the deck, and then we're going to go ahead and stand up the vanguard. So we're going to be going first in this situation so that we can actually bully. So we're going to draw for turn, drawing into Persona Rite, another card that you would want to keep in hand at all times. So obviously we're discarding our cycle card, riding into the grade 1, soul blasting out the grade 0, and putting the cycle card on the bottom, drawing into another card, another Ramona. Whoa, this is going to be an insane turn. So our opponent's going to attack into us, and in this situation, obviously, we don't want to take any damage until we really want to. And one thing I do really love about Wilista is that it is a deck that you do not need any damage until you get to grade 3. So we're going to be guarding that, not letting our opponent give us any damage quite yet, not until we're ready. So we're going to draw for turn, and we're going to draw into an Elvira. So this is where things get a little bit tricky because we do need to discard a card for our deck, and then we're also going to need to put a card from our hand into our soul in order to actually get the gem card. So I think since Elvira isn't going to be doing anything this turn, I'm going to discard her, and hopefully we can draw into some more or see some more off the top with grade 3 Wilista. I do have 2 Ramonas. As cool as double Ramona is, I think I'm just going to tuck one away into the soul. If that were an Ophelia, I would have no qualms with getting rid of her, but we're just going to put her into the soul in order to search out our gem card. So it looks like our deck still needs a little bit more shuffling. So we're going to be adding that gem card to our hand. And of course, just give it a quick shuffle, activating the gem card. So we're going to be drawing one off the gem and then one off the grade 2 Wilista. So draw into a PG and another critical trigger. So PGs are a card that I usually mulligan back if I ever see an opening hand, because PGs are not very useful in the early game. They're kind of a dead card. Nice that we got another 15k shield, so that means that if we want to guard next turn, we can actually preserve our front trigger, so we don't have to waste the extra 5k that we would get when our opponent rides to grade 3. So since we do have another Ramona, we're going to call out the Ramona, and then of course the attack pattern, very simple. Ramona is getting plus 10k, so the opponent is at grade 1, so we're going to swing for 15, which is going to be a 2-card guard if they want to make it a 2 to pass. We're going to drive check into an Ophelia, which is a little unfortunate because we don't really want Ophelia right now, but even if our opponent gets a defensive, we can swing for 20 and still hit them over that. So our opponent's going to swing now. We do have the choice. We could take 1 damage and use Ophelia during our next turn, which I think we might as well do. So take this first attack, get into a heal trigger, which is probably going to make it so that our opponent can't hit us, assuming they called anything else. Let's say they swing to the Ramona. I kind of want to keep it for now, so I'm going to trade a trigger for the Ramona. So going to be standing and drawing. I was going to pitch the Ophelia, but now I don't have to because I am broken with this deck. I'm just going to discard my Cycle card right into the Wilista and be very careful to make sure you don't Soul Blast out the gem, putting her to the bottom of the deck and drawing another card, drawing into a front trigger. So we're looking to be pretty good for this turn. We're going to use the Wilista skill to Soul Blast the 1, check the top 5, and we're going to call 2 cards. So unfortunately we don't have a Yuika, so calling the Persona Ride doesn't really matter right now, and we do actually already have one in hand. Obviously we don't want to call the heal, we want to call this card, the Ophelia, and I think that since I do want to deck thin, make it easier for me to hit triggers, I'm going to be calling out this card in the back row center rear guard, and then we're going to use Ophelia to put it back. So theoretically I could have called the heal trigger there, or even honestly the Persona Ride, but I'm going to keep those in deck because I want the possibility of drive checking them or drawing into them to stay in the deck. And this card I don't mind saving for later. So what we're going to be doing is just calling those 2. She's mostly here just for cost because I can call the Ophelia since I have 1 CB. We're going to be activating the order for the turn. Order draws me 1, and then Olivia will draw me another one. So draw. Unfortunately draw into 2 triggers, which happens to me a lot, but it's shield value, so it's not the worst. We're going to call out the Ophelia, and now we're ready to start beating face. So we'd swing Ophelia for 13, the weakest attack of the turn. Wilista is going to be getting plus 15 with her own skill, and then plus 5k from the order, so she is swinging for 33 on the first grade 3 turn. So a massive, very big number. So we're going to drive check into a critical, crit, and then these are both going to be 28. So it doesn't really matter we give it. Let's just give it to Ramona because I like her a little bit better. Second check, another Olivia, so very good for next turn. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to counterblast 1, bot deck this, and shuffle. And in order to restand the Ophelia is going to be at 38, and then the Ramona is going to be at 28. So both of these are going to be hitting for very big numbers, especially since at this point our opponent is at grade 2. So we're going to swing 28, then 38, and probably push them to at least 3 or 4. And during this next turn, the opponent might try to take out the rears. Sometimes I'll guard them depending on how many cards I have left in the deck. I do only have 2 more Ramonas, so I might put some more priority in guarding her and less into guarding the Ophelia because I have a higher chance of actually hitting her off of the top 5 during my next turn. So let's say ideally on your first Persona Ride, ooh, that's a Ramona gone, and a heal trigger. Let's say I go to 3 with 2 open CB. So you always want to be Persona Riding when you have 2 open CB. So just keep that in mind when you're taking damage. Sometimes I will take the Vanguard swing hoping for a critical trigger so that I can at least have the 2 damage guaranteed, and then they can't really damage deny me anymore. But we're going to go into this turn, draw into another Persona Ride. God, I'm so good at this game. Persona Riding into the Wilista, draw into a gem, which always happens to me. I'm like, okay, I'm going to Persona Ride, and then I'm going to discard a card so that I can get my gem back. But of course, I don't need to do that because I'm cracked, and I always draw into the gem. So normally, if you didn't draw into the gem, I would probably pitch a card, add the gem from drop zone back to hand so that you can cycle it. But since I drew into another one, I'm not really going to need to use that skill. And I have another Persona Ride to basically guarantee it to me next turn anyway. So right now, we're going to use the Wilista skill to Soul Blast the 1, check the top 5 cards of the deck. So I guess it didn't really matter if we guarded the Ramona because we got another one. But in this situation, I think we are just going to be calling out this, and then I think we'll just deck them. This is a little bit risky because this is my last Rona, but we're looking to hit some really good triggers this turn, and Rona is getting closer and closer to her not really viability turns. So I think it's fine. From this point onward, we probably prefer Ophelia's over Ramona's because it's going to be getting progressively a little bit harder to actually use Ramona. But of course not this turn. We're going to call out the other Olivia. If I had an extra CB, I would definitely use this skill because that means you're hitting for 28 and 35, which are super good numbers. But since we only have 2 CB, we don't want to waste it on a extra 5k, even though it makes better numbers. But using the order, we're draw 1, 2, 3 now. Draw 1, draw 2. Draw 3, pretty good. PG cycle card, and then extra shield. A little bit sucks because we're gonna probably not hit a trigger, but now we have the ideal setup. So what I always like to do is I don't like to boost until the second attack, because you want to have your weaker attacks first and then your stronger attacks after that, so that you're hitting over defensive, you're hitting better numbers. So we're gonna start off with 23 from the Ophelia, and then we're going to swing for the 30. Essentially, these are both the same number. This is a 13k guard, whereas this is a 20 point, or 13. This is a 15 point guard, and this is a 20 point guard, so a little bit of different numbers there. So this is a trigger, and then this is a front trigger. So then we're going to be swinging the Wilista, who is now at 43 thanks to all the skills. And then this is the timing that Wilista actually activates, so you do kind of need to remember that. You Counter Blast 1, you Soul Blast out your grade 3 Wilista, and then you restand one of your rear guards. Obviously, you want to restand the card that is not Ophelia, because Ophelia is going to be restanding on her own. So you're just going to be drive checking, drive check 1, Ophelia, drive check 2, the last Persona ride, which is great, and not actually a problem because we have a massive hand, 2 PGs, and a ton of 15k shields. So we are golden for our next turn. So at the end of the battle, we're going to Counter Blast 1, put this card on the bottom of the deck once again, and then restand the Ophelia. So I believe these numbers, since I didn't get any triggers, are still hitting like a truck, but they're not as big as they could. As you can see, our deck's already getting decently thin. We'd be swinging 43. Is this 43? No, this is 38. And then this is going to be 38 plus 8, 46. So still pretty big, strong numbers. But, you know, if we had gotten any triggers, or if we had been able to use this skill, they would have been that much stronger. Alright, that's going to do it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to do all those YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.